Hello everyone, Sam here, and this is going to be a quick video regarding President's Day. I kind of was looking at my calendar today, and today is, of course, President's Day, and I was still working on a couple of the books that I was trying to finish, particularly the ones regarding Haggard January. The last few stories for that I'm going to be reviewing this week once I finish getting the last few chapters done. But I was looking at today, and I realized that today was President's Day, and I also realized that I actually had a fair amount of reading material related to presidents. Some of them were ones that I've had for a while. Others were ones I got fairly recently. But I thought maybe this would be a good time to do a little bit of that reading, because some of these I've really wanted to get to, but for one reason or another haven't got to. So I figured today was a good day to start, to basically look at President's Day readings that involve American presidents. And I figure I'm going to work on these over the next few weeks, and most of them I'll probably discuss in March, because most of these are going to take 2 or 3 weeks of reading, so it'll be March by the time I finish them. But I figured today would be a good way to start discussing President's Day stories, so I was going to show you guys the ones that I was going to read over the next few weeks, and you can tell me what you think. First one I was going to read is an ebook. I've had this story for a while, and it's called Colonial Nightmare. And it's a little hard to see on my camera, but the picture is the famous painting of George Washington when he was in the Virginia militia for the British. And Colonial Nightmare takes place right before the French and Indian War starts. The whole idea is that George Washington is working for the governor of Virginia, the colonial governor, because it's still under British rule. And the governor sends Washington out on this mission to basically go reconnoiter with the French in the Ohio Territory, essentially to prevent any nastiness from unfolding between the French and the British, particularly regarding their Indian allies, because the French and British both have Indian allies. But Colonial Nightmare is not a figure of speech. It's meant to be literal, because the whole idea of the story is that it's showing George Washington and his companions come across something not very good, and it's implied to sort of be horror-related. I'm not sure if it's like a curse or a monster or something, but it's implied they come across something bad, and the whole idea is that Washington doesn't talk about it, and the story is just basically examining this incident and what happened to Washington and his buddies that made him not want to talk about this incident. So it's historical fiction as well as horror, and that was really interesting to me, so I'm going to check this out and see if I like it. The next story is actually stories, because it's a 3-part series. They're separate books, but they're novellas. And it was by a author named Eric M. Hamilton. Oh, and I forgot, Colonial Nightmare was I believe the author's name was David Vinning. David Vinning did Colonial Nightmare. Sorry about that. Forgot to mention his name. But Eric M. Hamilton did this next series, And this next series is titled The Presidents of the Uncanny States of America. And these stories are essentially weird fiction, but with presidents, with American presidents. The whole idea is that 3 different stories examine American presidents who find themselves in these very strange, otherworldly situations. They are sometimes horror-related, sometimes they're science fiction-related, fantasy. It varies depending on the story. But the whole idea is that these presidents experience something that can't be explained with simple rationality. They're essentially weird fiction. And the 3 stories, all of them by Eric M. Hamilton. First one is Franklin Pierce in Death of a Vice President. And this is a story about United States President Franklin Pierce, who I believe was the one right before James Buchanan. So I believe his term was 1852 to 1856, somewhere around there. So he's right before the Civil War. And the whole idea of this story is that Pierce's vice president dies under very strange circumstances. And it's essentially a it describes it on the back as a psychological horror story. And because the whole idea is that Pierce is trying to figure out how did his vice president die. And as the back sort of tells, the answer may not be what Pierce wants to hear. So this one is very interesting. It's the very first of the series, so that's going to be interesting to read. The second one is a little more comedic sounding. It's titled An Inconvenient Presidency, the time-traveling misadventures of President Al Gore. As you can see, now you might say, wait, Al Gore wasn't president. But for those that don't know, in the 2000 election, it was a notoriously close election between Al Gore, the Democratic candidate, and George W. Bush, the Republican. And there were a whole bunch of court cases and recounts and things like that. And eventually George W. was declared the winner. But this story examines, well, what if Al Gore was actually the winner and for some reason he comes across a mysterious device that he needs that can affect time, and apparently he needs it because some sort of disaster is going to occur during his term. But of course, with this goes on the back, the hilarious story of the president that never was, and discover why history turned out different. So this one's a little more comedic than the Franklin Pierce one. And the third one, this one's going to be topical. It's A President's Day Carol, Choose Your Own Ending. And as you can see here, this involves Donald, and this is a choose your own adventure book, where the whole idea, if you know what choose your own adventure books are, it was basically you had to read through the book, and at a certain point you could flip obviously involves President Trump, and the whole idea is that he gets haunted by the spirits of former presidents right after he's been elected. and it's clearly in the vein of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and the whole point of the story is you get to decide whether how Trump reacts to these ghosts. So again, kind of a comedic take on the subject, just like the Al Gore one. I have not read it. I believe it says 2024, so I'm not sure if this was published before or like right after the 2024 election. So if it was published before, this was good guessing on Hamilton's part. If he was able to do this beforehand. Oh, I just cheated and watched the first thing. I read the first page. No, it's not set during 2024. It's meant to be during 2016, 2017. So this is actually meant to be a first term Trump story. So, okay, that answers that. So, I'm gonna read it and see how it goes. This next one is going to actually be a biography about George Washington. Now, on the front here, it says Great Men Series because this came from a publisher called, I believe it was Imperium Press. And they published a bunch of biographies under their Great Men Series. But these are not original biographies that Imperium wrote. These are actually republishings of older biographies that have fallen into the public domain and are free to use. So, let's see. The original title of this was George Washington, An Historical Biography. Published in 1889 by Houghton, Mifflin and Company. There's no author listed, but it does a biography of George Washington. And ironically, this is the only book that might qualify for the America 250 event I was doing. But since George Washington predates the Revolution, this doesn't quite count as an American Revolution book because it covers his whole life from before America to after his presidency. So I probably won't count this as America 250. But I wanted to do this because George Washington is an important president, so I think it's fitting that I read a biography by him, and especially a biography that was written in the 1800s. That's going to be kind of an interesting element to read about. And speaking of George Washington, I've been itching for a pulp story, so I decided I was going to read this one I bought a while back from Steger Books, titled The Return of George Washington. And this one is kind of an interesting premise. Essentially what it is, it was a story published in the pulp magazine Argosy. And let me see what the exact date it was published on. It was published in 1927. And the general gist of this story is it's by George F. Worts. And the gist of this story is that this tabloid editor is contacted by a reclusive scientist who tells him that he can bring the dead back to life because he's made this machine that's able to bring the dead back to life. All it needs is a complete skeleton of the subject, not a partial one. It needs a complete skeleton in order to bring the thing back to life. And he wants to bring someone back to life, but of course, he wants some money for it. So he wants $1 million. And so the editor puts the question up to his readership, saying, well, who do you guys want to bring back? And the readership decides they want to bring George Washington back to life. So they take George Washington's remains from Mount Vernon, put it in the machine, and this young man, calling himself Colonel Washington, steps out. And he, because it's a younger Washington, he asks for General Braddock, who I believe was one of Washington's commanding officers in the French and Indian War, a British general. So the whole idea of the story is finding out how people would react, how 1927 America would react if George Washington came back to life. So that's a very interesting premise to me, and basically looking at how this sort of event would affect people, and see how Washington would do in the age of radio and the Roaring '20s. So that was just kind of an interesting idea, so I really am excited to check this out. And the last one is titled Presidents, and the subtitle is Imaginary Moments in the Lives of America's Great. And it's by Theodore Roscoe, who apparently was a fairly well-known pulpiteer. I don't think I've read anything by him, but I've heard his name thrown around a lot in pulp groups, so I know he was some sort of big deal in the pulp world. Let's see. Yeah, all of these were published in Argosy 2 from 1939 to 1941. And what Presidents is basically doing somewhat humorous looks at the lives of the first 7 American presidents, going from George Washington to Andrew Jackson, and basically looking at what their lives would be like if they'd taken some different choices. And it's, from what I've heard, is it's sort of meant to be sort of satirical and playful, because one of the things in there is sort of like, this looks like, what if Washington had accepted the kingship of America? What if Tom Jefferson basically... oh no, my mistake. What if John Adams had gone on a sojourn during his presidency? And sort of little things like that. It's essentially alternate history, but it's sort of a much more, from what I've gathered, sort of a playful alternate history. This isn't like a, what was his name? Is it Harry Turtledove or Henry Turtledove who does the all the alternate histories about war or whatnot? But these were, but these are just short stories regarding these possible alternate futures for the presidents. It was, and as I said, it was written. All of them were written right before World War II, and Roscoe was just sort of writing these light, sort of satirical alternate histories. So I was kind of interested in that just because it seemed like an interesting subject. It's kind of interesting reading alternate history. So that is all that I have for the President's Day reading. Like I said, I'll be discussing these in March after I've read them all. And yeah, I did this episode more on the fly. I know this is a little more disconnected than usual, but I really wanted to talk about this before President's Day was over, so I did. And thank you all for listening to me. The last few Haggard January stories will be up within the next week or so. Thank you for your patience, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.